This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation. Joining us today is Dr. Matt Poepsel. Matt is the author of Expand the Circle, Enlightened Leadership for Our New World of Work, and host of Lead the People podcast. He serves as VP Enterprise Solutions at the Predictive Index. He holds a PhD in psychology, an MBA, and a Harvard Business School Certificate of Management Excellence. Matt has more than 20 years of leadership experience as a software executive and consultant. He is also a U.S. Marine, an Ironman triathlon finisher, and a student of Buddhist philosophy.
What I really like about Expand the Circle and really all of Matt's work is how accessible it is. It doesn't take long to realize that he is deeply connected to research and it's academically sound, but it comes across conversational and not assuming that you have a foundation. Very accessible. So it ends with exercises that anybody can get value, and it creates a picture of what these circles are and where to begin and how to go about. Very accessible, and yet it's clearly connected to the wisdom of the ages when you talk about the philosophy and also all of the research on effective psychology and leadership. But you can start where you are, access it, and know how to have better work in a better world.
100%. I agree with you, Tom. Matt's book is a wonderful blend of his personal stories, interviews, and research that he has so masterfully curated for us. And you really do feel like you're just sitting down with him for a chat as you're reading the book. So it's a leadership book that you look forward to reading, and you're enlightened on the way. Welcome, Matt Poepsel.
Good morning, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Tom and Adrian. Appreciate it.
Yeah, welcome back. We're so excited to have you back on the podcast. You were one of our first guests when we started, and we're still here. So we're happy to still be here. It's, I think, 3 years, Tom. We debate on that, but I think it's 3 years. But this time we get to talk about the release of your book, which is so incredible. And before we don't say the title, it's called Expand the Circle, Enlightened Leadership for Our New World of Work. And, you know, of course, we've been through it. One of the things I'll say again that we loved so much about it is the way that you have woven in the personal stories with the interviews that you've done, with the curation of research that you've delved into and gone through, and that it's just such a conversational way to approach your take on where leadership needs to go next.
So thanks for saying that. I appreciate that.
Well, it's all true. So let's dive right in, because where I'm curious to kind of understand is what drew you to writing the book now?
Yeah, I think I have studied leadership and I've enjoyed being an operating leader for decades. And the reason I wrote the book was because for me, the wheels came off during the pandemic. I don't know whose bright idea it was to schedule a midlife crisis right in the middle of a global pandemic, but that's what I did. And I thought things were going so well in my career and my personal life, and it was. And then all of a sudden, just like so many of us, when we went through this wild experience of having our values sort of reprioritized, I came out and realized that I had kind of fallen out of love with my work and just didn't feel like myself. And I started searching for answers. And it was really a brush with mortality in the form of my father had been diagnosed as having a cancerous tumor on his kidney, that he would go through this lengthy recovery process. And it reminded me, like, we know how this movie ends. And when I started to resume my meditation practice that I had abandoned for more than 15 years, I started to think a little bit more deeply about life and leadership and work and our opportunity to make a difference. And all that stuff in my brain just kind of commingled and led me to create this framework that really is inspired by what I would call Tibetan Buddhist meditation philosophy and principles, but is squarely grounded in what I've experienced and what I've studied in Western psychology of leadership over a very lengthy period of time.
Well, we can't go down. I was very touched by that, and we can't go fully down that rabbit hole. But I think in our culture, the denial of death, just pretend it doesn't exist, really makes us shallower, makes us reactive. And
Yeah.
we do know how that story ends, but only for 100% of us, but we pretend we don't. So that's you deciding what to do with what you have and what you've learned and where to take it. That's very inspiring.
Yeah, and I think something that's a little bit more accessible for people is to think about change management. So we're starting to see this in organizations today where everything is being upended. And a lot of times people resist change because of the same reasons that we don't really like to talk about the big change that we were just talking about all that much, which comes down to fear of the unknown, fear of uncertainty. We think that our work experiences and our life and our happiness are fixed, but that's impossible when everything is just swirling around us all the time. So I think there's a next level of understanding when we start to realize that everything is effectively impermanent, is always constantly changing. How can we as leaders help ourselves and help those around us navigate this inevitable change? And that's what a lot of my work in organizations today is really focused on, and different responses to change and how we can help people be more artful and have a better experience going through that.
Mhm. We've been talking a lot about, and I hear from leaders I work with that, we're changing all the time, and we don't need, we're managing it, right? But how well are we managing it? And, as you know, I do a lot of work in change management and helping organizations and leaders through that. And I've been finding a pivot for myself in the way that I am showing up and practicing, in that yes, there's methodology, yes, there's steps, yes, there's process, there's all of those good things, but really it's a mindset, because you can't take the 6 weeks to analyze, right? Why are we changing? What's really changing? Who's impacted by all of that? You need to do that like right now, right? Because and that's, I think, what the pandemic gave us was, oh, we have to just be already ready to answer those questions, right? And I think that's a lot of where you're headed at with the enlightened leader.
Mhm.
And so what does that mean? So paint us a picture of an enlightened leader.
Yeah, effectively, when I describe the term enlightenment, in this case, we're departing from the philosophical sense and the Eastern sense, and we're talking about moving past outdated attitudes and beliefs. When we start to think about what passes for contemporary leadership today, it's hardly contemporary at all. It's been in practice since the 50s and 60s, and our organizations that we think are so modern are really suffering because of the nature of what we pass as leadership. What we're finding now is that organizations are much more focused on what I would call stakeholder capitalism. So it's not just about the bottom line. You won't attract top talent today if all you care about is making money for your board. Like, that's not enough anymore. Individuals themselves, what we see with the youngest generation, for example, they're more intentional and purposeful and looking for meaning and social impact than we've ever seen. They're experiencing this sort of lack of selflessness that is kind of hallmark of their generation. But in leadership, when I went looking, I didn't find that. I found a lot of me-centric, egocentric techniques that have really stopped producing results for us. So in terms of change, what that means is that people will experience predictable responses to change. One is, I don't want to lose something I already have that I enjoy. The other is, I don't want this new thing that I don't want, and now it's been thrust upon me. The other is, why do we have to change? So I'll dig in my heels because we don't really need to change when in fact we do. Another is anxiety. What will become of me, right? And another is pride. I know better. I don't know why they're doing this. I don't know why the executives decided this. If they came down here, they'd see how it is, and they wouldn't come to the same conclusion. And all of those things are counterproductive. But the more we operate from an ego place, a me place, when we're working with those around us and trying to lead them, it only exacerbates the issues. So I think that's where I love the idea of taking an enlightened approach, which is more modern, which is really focused on everything but yourself. It's focused on the mission. We're here to do good work. It's focused on the welfare and the productivity of other people before yourself. And it's a leap of faith, perhaps, but it's the only one that works in the future.
Well, if we zoom out to the circles and we start with a better world, humanity-centered world, then when we get to the self, where we have the most immediate impact, it's already through a different lens, isn't it? So we start with
100%.
ourselves, but we start with ourselves from the lens of a better world, and we can go backward and forward through the circles.
Yeah, it's a great point, Tom. And I think when I describe the circles, when I talk about we must first learn to lead yourself before you can learn to lead others, before you lead your team, lead your organization, and finally lead out as far as you can out into the world. And what I like to say is that when it comes to aspiration and intention, we should work outside in. To your point, Tom, we should start with the world before thinking about our organization and our place in that world and our team relative to the organization, to maybe one other person, us working as a pair versus, and then myself. So if I have the mindset and the intention from the outside in, that's great. But again, to your point, action and accountability works from the inside out. How can I affect change? Because I'm, my mindset and my attitudes, my beliefs are the most in my control. And then can I extend that out to one other person, like me and my boss, or me and the person who works for me, and me and my peer, and then out to the team, out to the organization, out to the world. So it's an interesting dynamic when we start thinking about what we want in terms of the impact and the goodwill should be out as far as possible, and then work our way back in to figure out how to do that. But then as we take accountability and we take action, work from the inside out.
And the word that you use in talent optimization, alignment, is key, because there are people busy changing the world and refuse to look in the mirror and make any changes in themselves. And there's also people busy with personal development that aren't really paying attention. So I love the way it goes in and out, and the alignment with the values is key. That's a powerful model.
It is. And I like to think a lot about energy. When you think about the way that energy moves through any system, you could think about sound waves, light waves, et cetera. Whenever we end up with any sort of interference or misalignment, it sort of reduces the ability of that energy to make it to the place we want. So a big concrete wall is going to muffle sound or light, for example. The same is true in our organizations. We hire people, we want to put them to work, we organize them to focus on specific work product. And then if there's misalignment, it siphons off that energy. Now, all of a sudden, you've got somebody saying, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute in your office?" You're like, "Oh, that's wasted time and effort and energy." And we just lose all of that potential, if you will, to work on the mission and to deliver the product for the customer, or whatever it is that our organization exists to do. So I really like that example you're bringing up of alignment, because it is energy that flows through our people infrastructure in the case of organizations, and any sort of misalignment of either competing styles or competing goals, or sort of misaligned incentives, it definitely shows up in the work product, and it shows up in the experience that people are having at work.
Mm-hmm. And those are two dilemmas often, that if you took the time to explore those, what seem to be opposing things, chances are, if you put the energy into it, you can find the common denominator and find that you actually are in fact working perhaps towards the same end goal, but in different ways with a different point of view, right? So the beauty there is marrying those.
Yeah, hugely important. And one of my favorite analogies from the book, we talked about elephants in this nature reserve in Myanmar, and they were in this nature reserve, and there was this team of behavioral scientists who had arranged a table that put 2 trays of bananas on it. And so, of course, the elephants are going to want to eat the bananas. But what they had done is they put a wall between them, and they took a rope and they put it through the wall, through some fittings on the table, and through another hole in the wall. And what the elephant would find is if they would pull on the rope to try to draw the table closer, it would just slip through the fittings. But if 2 elephants paired up and each pulled on the table, they could pull it closer to them. They reach over and they grab the bananas. And you're like, wow, elephants can learn to cooperate like that very quickly. But what the scientists did is they switched up and they only put out 1 tray of bananas. And all of a sudden, the elephants didn't want to share. And so they started engaging in behaviors known as block or attack or withdraw or submit, and all these types of things. And cooperation almost immediately fell to 0 in the face of scarcity. And I thought, man, that is exactly what I see in organizations, where we could cooperate. We could sort of sacrifice, our whole interests of ourselves to help the whole system work better. And there's plenty to go around. But when things like resources are scarce, right now we're kind of in budgeting season, so not everybody's going to get there, is what's going to happen. Things like attention, airtime in a meeting. There's only so much airtime people can have. What about recognition? Like when these things get scarce, cooperation starts to fall. And that creates that type of misalignment we were talking about earlier.
Mhm.
So thanks to the elephants for showing us the right way to do things.
So we all know if we expand the pie, everybody gets more and there's abundance. But when we're feeling threatened, we see it as a fixed pie, and then we want to get ours.
Yeah. And even if the pie is fixed, I can't just take more than my share all the time. It's just not a way that is working anymore. And I think that's exactly what we're starting to see again with top talent having choices. When they see organizations that are pouring tons of profit into the coffers of the executives and the boards, for example, they're deemed as bad actors. And now all of a sudden, I'm starting to see for young people, for example, they'll put a lot of peer pressure on their friends and their colleagues if they're working for somebody who's perceived as not being a great company to work for. So part of what you're seeing is organizations touting a lot of what they're doing in the area of sustainability. And part of that's because if you work for a company that's blowing smog and destroying the planet, you're going to get a lot of pressure from people around you being like, you work for them, gross. And you're like, this isn't
Mhm.
good, right? So a lot of this starts to come when we are overly fixated on our own self-interest, either at a personal level, at a team level, at an organizational level. It's actually now starting to be counterproductive. And it was perhaps always the right thing to do, to be a little bit more selfless, but now it's becoming, sort of the mandate, if you will. So I'm excited about this, the future of leadership as being an enlightened future, because we have to move past our own limited view of egocentric and self-centric, behaviors exclusively.
Yeah. What was the driver of that shift in your mind? I mean, certainly the pandemic all got us thinking, I think, but has to be more than that.
I think it's a constant progression. I think historically we've seen our businesses become more evolved. We moved from hunter gatherers to the industrial revolution to now the post-industrial revolution, and now we're seeing things like conscious capitalism, the form of Patagonia's founder, bequeathing essentially the company to the planet. It's never seen anything like that before. We see our individuals now. When you think about it, most people in the Western society, at least, have a pretty easy means of getting their basic needs met: food, shelter, clothing, etc. But they want more. They want to have belonging at work. They want to have meaning and purpose. They want to have career development. We start seeing that internal mobility is important, more important than ever, professional development opportunities. So they're constantly raising the bar. And I think as leaders, we have to do the same thing. We have to move beyond transactional leadership. We have to move past even servant leadership and authentic leadership into a more enlightened way of working with others around us, just to keep pace. So I think there's always this constant evolution and improvement and elevation of the work of the worker. Now it's time for the leader as well.
Well, going in a few rings to the team level, I have something that really intrigued me, and I'd like you to shine light and lighten, but I experience it. And it's specifically around asking the question, what's possible, which can lead us up into the clouds, and then remembering to stay grounded, what's feasible, and you put that within critical thinking. And I was thinking about the work styles, and there's a temptation to think one of those two has to dominate. So if you don't have any controls in place, you have chaos. If you have too many controls, you have tyranny. And that tension can become productive, but only if there's a leader that recognizes it's not either or. And I would love you to address how to become more aware of the temptation to choose one way of thinking and lose all the richness of the others.
Yeah, historically, when you think about left brain, right brain dominance, and we know left brain controls things like being analytical and reason and these sorts of things. And the right brain is typically associated with creativity and innovation and seeing patterns and novelty and these sorts of things. Well, obviously, we want to use our whole brains. But inside of our organizations, a lot of times we wire a lot of that stuff out because we're so fixated on producing predictable, reliable, scalable outcomes. We almost approach the modern organization as machinists.
Mechanical. That's what came up.
So mechanical. It's like we're obsessed with technology and operations and process. We act as if we don't have people who work for us. We look at our spreadsheets and we look at our system diagrams and all these things. And yet then we wring our hands when we're like, why are we not getting the results we want? Oh, that's right. We skipped over the people.
Humans.
Oh, yeah, imagine that.
The human thing messes it all up.
Yeah. So when you ask the question, what's possible, we're asking it from two frames of mind. One is if we remove all of the traditional limiters, asking what's possible allows us to go further than we would otherwise. If you think about all the things that we're so excited about in this day and age, everything from the way that we stream our content to, what we see in terms of new innovations, et cetera, they were all people who thought a lot more broadly about what could happen or what might be than
unfathomable a decade ago.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we need to remove those restrictions, but at the same time, we can't just completely live in a dream world. We have to be able to actually produce these things. So that's where I feel like the right marriage between this creativity, innovation, the freedom to make mistakes, the freedom to allow ourselves to daydream, and then, but also marry that up in equal measure with the feasibility of critical thinking. So if we skew too far one way or the other, we're not balanced.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've found in my research through writing the book, since writing the book, what we really want to find is integration. So it's not like, how do we do one and then the other? It's how do we ideally marry the two together and integrate them and infuse them with one another? Anytime we try to hold things separate, all of a sudden it creates a lot of challenges. But if we allow things to sort of meld together, then I feel like just like the human brain works that way, in an ideal sense, it's equally integrated and we can do both.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be almost like a de bono thing where we put different hats on so that we're just going to do possibility thinking. And then we say, well, we have to do something by Friday. And you let that tension work its way out and don't try to resolve it all completely.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times, like in design circles, I spent many years as a product designer, and we would do what we would call divergent and then convergent thinking. So in divergent thinking, it's like, let's just get all the options out on the table. But then when we need to actually, so we don't miss any potentially great ideas, but then when we need to hone in on something that's actually shippable in my world, then we need to converge onto a specific set of what are the best candidates for us to pursue. And so you go through this kind of a diamond, like, let's just get all the ideas on the table. And then of the ideas we've got on the table, let's converge down into the most workable candidates. And, so it's nice to see that we can do both. If you're part of an organization and you claim that you want to be agile and you want to be transformative and you want to be innovative, and then you punish anyone for ever making a mistake, you are not going to get those things. Right. You're taking all the safety away. You're taking all the willingness to put yourself out there and get real breakthroughs that way. And it's hard to do that inside mature organizations. If you're Ford Motor Company, for example, you're trying to produce a lot of cars very efficiently, but at the same time, you need somebody in the building to think about, wild, outlandish concepts of what comes next. And it's hard to do both of those under one roof.
Yeah. I think about questions like, let's get all the bad ideas out on the table. I've said that sometimes, right? Because let's do it. Let's get them all the bad ideas, give them all, because actually there might be a good idea in what you think is a bad idea, right? So you've automatically filtered it in your head, but let's get it out because somebody else might go, oh, but wait, if we just twisted that one thing, that becomes a good idea, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then I also like to say, why would this fail? Once you think you've got the good idea, why would this fail, right? To kind of do, again, that sort of checks and balances to keep you from going, you've come up with that, what you believe to be the best idea. You take it down the road, but you don't look on the sides if there's anything else before you get too far.
It's true. And I think that as humans, our discriminating mind, that portion that it really does issue judgment, is just so strong. We're just constantly looking at things. This is good, that's bad, all day long. When in reality, when you strip all that away, an idea is just an idea. It's not inherently good or bad. Now, it might be feasible or less, or it might be the right time. Like, we'll get to that point. But if we could remove this sort of stigma of the first discriminating bit, eventually that's where you find the biggest breakthroughs happen. Why can't we do this? I like to think about Legos a lot. When I was a kid, Legos aren't like today's Legos. It was just a big box of colorful bricks and good luck to you, right? Now you're like, they're highly specialized. And if somebody
with instructions,
with instructions.
I went to the Lego land. I was just amazed. There were 2 different colors when I was a kid and maybe 3 different shapes and sizes, and that was
Yeah,
it. Somebody
exactly.
thought, wow, we could build on this.
Right. So somebody came through and probably it wasn't a popular decision at some point in that company's history to kind of go to the specialized route, but it saved the company in the end. And I think that that's an example where, an idea is just an idea until we infuse meaning into it. And I think a lot of times in organizations, our culture is destroying the chance for innovation, and it's destroying our chance to really have the level of safety and inclusivity that we need to be able to find the next breakthrough and to really fuel the growth of the company. So many companies this year will die because they just couldn't get out of their own history. And that means that if you want to transform your company, you better transform your leadership. Otherwise, it is not going to happen.
You mentioned safety, and you have some good information on psychological safety, but within the context of what we're already talking about with ego, when it's my idea, when it becomes personal, then you're putting your thought to it, and I'm feeling attacked. You didn't attack me. You're looking at an idea, and if I hadn't put it on the table, we wouldn't even be able to discuss it. But I might be feeling, oh, he doesn't like my ideas.
Yeah, I think defending my idea the most viscerally because it was my idea, that's a problem.
It is.
Feeling attacked when somebody, pokes holes in your idea using the techniques that Adrian was talking about a little bit earlier, feeling like that was an assault on you and they think I'm something that I'm not. That's all ego too. So how would our organizations be different if we could just delete that little ego bit, and all of a sudden we don't have the attachment to an idea because as being my idea. Anytime you hear that me, mine, here, now, these things, it just really is reducing the likelihood of us having a success in terms of the type of alignment and the mission, the vision that we talked about a little bit earlier.
And you get fewer ideas. So there's your scarcity instead of abundance, because I did it once and Matt shot it down. I'm not going to bring another idea. Pretty soon there aren't many to shoot down.
There aren't many to shoot down. There's a lot of yes going around the table as we all happily sail off the cliff, right? And it happens all the time. Like I said, there are many companies this year that will die because they just couldn't sort of get past all that, the me sort of volume in people's heads. You got to turn down the volume on that part of the equation.
It makes me think of how organizational structure can prohibit that in a lot of ways. Like if you have such a rigid structure that your marketing department can't have an idea for your product research and development department, right? And like, oh no, you go deal with the marketing, we're figuring out the new products, and they don't ever get to commingle or integrate. And that all starts with how are you reinforcing that structure, or how are you diminishing those lines?
Yeah, I think what's really frightening too is a lot of times it comes down to interior design for companies that are working on-prem. So all of a sudden it's like, if you find that you spend time with the people who are closest in your physical proximity, and all of a sudden you take that marketing department, you move them to another part of the building or maybe up a floor, all of a sudden those sort of collisions aren't going to happen as they once did. And we don't even realize that. Now we take a situation where we move to hybrid work and remote work, and all of a sudden proximity doesn't become available to us anymore. And you feel a lot different hopping into somebody unexpectedly on a Zoom call than you would just bumping into them at the water cooler and having a conversation about something you're working on. So it's like everything is changing. And the more we can find unity and to integrate, tear down walls that were designed for ego and protection reasons, and start to allow the sort of alignment that we've been talking about to really manifest, that's what it's going to take to succeed in this new world of work of ours.
Well, we only have time for one more question.
Well, I was going to ask a big one too.
Well, go ahead. We'll deal with it. We can't stop now, but I hated to put that on the table, but go ahead, Adrian.
Well, I'm thinking org structure and leaders and leadership, and just like, where do you start? Where do you start? We say self, but self when we think big. So
yeah, I think it's so true. I think it has to start with intention. We have to want to develop our leadership capacity. The reality is that everything I've been taught about strategy is that we have to make sure that our aspirations are backed up by our capabilities. And what I see too often is organizations whose leadership wants to do things. We want to grow like this, or we want to do this, but they just haven't invested in the leadership capacity to make that possible. And so when that happens, we're setting our people up to fail. We're not going to be able to hit the metrics, and it creates this doom loop that Jim Collins used to talk about, in terms of now we're making poor decisions out of desperation. We're making the situation worse. So it starts with an intention to say, we need to invest in our leadership capability. And once that intention has been made, then I feel like we have to start with the actual talking about the improvement, the development, investments. It's not just going to happen on its own. Leadership is not the kind of garden that grows on its own. You've got to water your people. And that means making time and making the investment in helping them to get better. The good news is that it's not that expensive compared to the alternative. And it doesn't have to be all that time consuming. A book like mine is a pretty breezy read when you get down to it. You don't make people slog through it, but the ideas in it really can be put into practice. I include exercises that allow you to change the trajectory like right away. 5 minutes a day would make a huge difference. If we can get our people practicing these techniques, they'll prepare us for the future. So I think it starts with intention and it follows through with action. If you're a leader who's listening on the podcast and you're like, well, my company's not really investing in me, that doesn't take away your obligation to invest in yourself. So I think getting the good stuff in your brain and following through on it is always possible. That's a door that's open to all of us if we have the courage and the commitment to follow through.
Well, I want to really put in a plug for the exercises, because our community of conversation is about a leadership beyond, and we have to, while we're looking at the outer ring, as you put it, we have to start where we are with what we have. And I would challenge anybody to look at those exercises and see that there is something you can do. Yes, we want others to come along. We want to touch all the circles, but there's something you can do at the end of that book that puts action to your intention. And then, like the Legos, you're like, well, that's just a little piece. I wonder how I could build on that, and with curiosity. And so it isn't something you read once, it's something you can keep going back to. So I love that framework, because it's action now, but thinking beyond, thinking way out as far as we can, a better world, better humanity, and just say, what can I do right where I am with a half an hour? So thank you for that structure.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing to follow on that is just to be patient. It takes time, it takes reinforcement, it takes a little bit with this. And there's an old Buddhist saying that says that a jug fills drop by drop. And it's so true. Little exercise, 5 minutes a day makes a world of difference. Take it back to your teams, engage in the conversation. Over time, those little micro investments really start to add up and pay off.
And we often don't do it because we compare it to where we want to be. And then we go, this isn't enough. And so we do nothing, which certainly isn't enough.
Yeah, certainly not enough. During the book writing process, they taught us, don't compare your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 10. And I love that. I love that concept. You go on LinkedIn or whatever, and you see people who are taking over big stages and making this huge impact. And you don't realize that they're 20 years in the process and you just got started. So it's like, stick with it. It makes a huge difference. The people around you will be better. You don't see what's under
what the iceberg, right? Under the surface.
Right, that's true
all
too.
Of that.
Careful
that goes
comparisons.
What came out of now your published book and speaking events and
that's right.
Yep. It's a lot.
Always an opportunity. Every day is a new opportunity to take that next step on our leadership path.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to all you contribute to the world of leadership.
It's just absolutely been my pleasure, Tom and Adrienne. I can't thank you enough for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.